Hello, 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 and welcome to the Press Y podcast with Gunner and Pat. It's the new weekly show where Pat and I discuss gaming-related news from this week, as well as other gaming things. So, to introduce ourselves, I'm Gunner. I love the gaming industry, as well as all things gaming.
I'm Patrick. The only thing I love more than my set of pink and green Joy-Cons is my virginity.
That is one thing.
It's two things. Three for local multiplayer, actually.
Okay, all right. So, this week's news. The big story is the Nintendo Switch Lite. Yes, it was unveiled, but we're going to get to that later. First, we're going to talk about a couple other things. So, to start us off, the first bit of news is that Activision announced that there is going to be crossplay for Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the new Call of Duty coming out this year. And frankly, I don't really care too much about Call of Duty, but I think that a big company, another big company doing crossplay in one of its very successful multiplayer games is a pretty bold and smart move. So we'll kind of see how that turns out. You have any thoughts, Patrick?
Right now, my main thought is holding back my cough. But I think, obviously, with the success of Fortnite and Rocket League, both of which are owned by Epic Games, obviously, seeing another big company kind of hop in the ring and kind of force these console manufacturers to differentiate themselves beyond building up their own ecosystems in artificial ways is a good thing. I think we're going to start to see more exclusives. Obviously, PlayStation and Nintendo both have great exclusives as it is. Microsoft is lagging a bit behind, I would say. But maybe with this move, we might finally see a Microsoft exclusive other than Halo.
Yeah, something like that. The other thing is with the next console generation coming up, consoles are becoming more and more just like affordable PCs, if you will. And so they really do need to start differentiating themselves the best they can. And like you said, Sony and Nintendo already have. Sony being, having tons of just awesome first party single player games. And then
my favorite is Little Big Planet.
Yeah, and console manufacturers have no reason to let their customer base out of the walled garden that they've created for them. They want you to see their product as the pinnacle product, the best product, right? They don't necessarily want you interacting with a bunch of people on PC or people on PlayStation or Xbox because they could see it as a better experience.
For example, people who are playing on a console other than a PlayStation might see that PlayStation owners have access to Little Big World, which I think is the best Sony exclusive.
Yes, thank you for reiterating that point. So now that big companies like Epic Games are forcing their hand with cross-platform, and now Activision is stepping in, it's gonna really force Sony and Sony and Microsoft to really differentiate themselves, especially in software, not necessarily just in hardware, but definitely in the games that they put out. And Sony's already been doing a great job on that.
Yeah, they have some great exclusives. I personally hope they remake Shadow of the Colossus again. I think another visual overhaul would be really good for it.
Yeah, another go around like 8K, something like that.
I mean, there's no reason not to, as far as I see it.
More
Also,
grass.
an HD remaster of Little Big Planet would be fun, I think.
With better water.
Yeah, both of those things.
With better water. All right. So the next thing we're going to move into is there is a new Cuphead show. Now, I personally don't have any interest watching this, but Patrick got pretty excited whenever he told me about it. So,
yeah. So when I saw this on Twitter, it was actually the first time I'd been able to sustain an erection since Reggie left office. So that was really exciting. But basically, it looks like Studio MDHR is going to be lending out their IP, their only IP really, Cuphead, and his best friend, possibly lover, that's just a headcanon I have, Mugman, to Netflix. Netflix kind of has a hit-or-miss history with some of their TV shows, some of their exclusives, but I think if they can stay true to the art style of Cuphead and, maybe just give it something a little more than just, they're fighting Satan, because that was lame, it could be fun. Obviously, Netflix did a pretty good job with the Castlevania show.
Which is very good. Very
the
good.
Castlevania show was really good. So I think if they bring that same enthusiasm and kind of dedication to the source material as Cuphead, obviously there's a lot less to work with. But
it's like making a story for Mario.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's not much to it, but I think honestly, the big appeal for me, for Cuphead at least, was the art style. So I was the gameplay was fun. I liked the gameplay, but the reason I kept playing it was because of the art style. I was just so interested in seeing what they were possibly going to do next because this whole art style, coupled with the music, was just amazing. The presentation was outstanding, and I think a TV show could really, really utilize that and just make a visual masterpiece. To be honest.
It would be pretty interesting. The other thing Studio MDHR has expressed interest in is they're propositioning Nintendo to make a Zelda game. So you know, I couldn't see them making a Zelda game in the same art style as Cuphead, but they did talk about wanting to do everything by hand. So hand paint it, watercolor it, whatever they want to do. But they specifically talk about how they don't want to reuse any assets, just paint it all by hand, which would be awesome. Absolutely awesome.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Zelda series, and I think if they, maybe do I don't know if the 1930s cartoon style of Cuphead would look great on Zelda. Um, just I think it might clash with the tone of the games in general a bit. But I think if maybe they went for maybe like a 1980s Studio Ghibli style or kind of the anime style we saw in the Link's Awakening 2019 reveal trailer, I think it could be really interesting. I do think it's funny that Studio MDHR has one success on their hands, and all of a sudden they think they are big enough to handle one of gaming's most iconic franchises.
Seriously though, but also seeing Nintendo lend out the Zelda IP to the people who did Cadence of Hyrule. So they're definitely interested in indie developers and people who show promise. But yeah, it is kind of interesting. They're really wearing the pants right now. Selling tons of copies of Cuphead, but having their own show based off of their game. Like that's a pretty big success story for a fairly new studio. So
Yeah, Nintendo giving Brace Yourself Studios, I believe is what it was, the IP to Zelda to create Cadence of Hyrule Zelda crossover was obviously a pretty big deal because it shows Nintendo lending out what is arguably their second biggest IP to a studio that had one game under their belt. A well-received game, sure, but still only one game. And I think Studio MDHR is in a similar position in which they have one really big game. I would say Cuphead is bigger than Cadence of Hyrule, or I'm sorry,
oh,
Cuphead is bigger than what is the first one called? I don't even know it.
Crypt of the Necrodancer.
Yeah, that proves my point.
See?
I know Cuphead. Everyone
Yeah.
knows Cuphead. Like it's very popular. People who don't know video games know Cuphead, and I didn't even know Crypt of the Necrodancer until they launched a Zelda crossover. That was the first experience I had with Crypt of the Necrodancer. I loved it, but I think Studio MDHR, I would argue, at this stage in their development, has more promise than Brace Yourself Games did. And so I don't think it's completely out of the question for Nintendo to allow this. Obviously, Cadence of Hyrule sales have been pretty good. It was a very well-received game. So it may make Nintendo more inclined to lend out their IPs to these indie developers to create more unique experiences for their big IPs.
Right. Think about this, though. Think about, the head of your development studio coming back and saying, hey, guys, we got a new project. You're like, okay, what is it? Nintendo wants us to make a Zelda game. They're like, wait, we're an indie studio. Like, how just absolutely wild would that be for you and, like, your career and just your notoriety of being part of that studio? Like, that'd just be incredible, but also be very nerve-wracking as well. So it'd be interesting to see if Nintendo shows any interest in Studio MDHR's proposition. And if they do, I'm sure we won't hear about it for plenty of years from now. So we're going to move on from this topic. The next thing up is from NintendoLife.com. Doug Bowser confirmed that the Nintendo is actually going to continue supporting the 3DS family of systems. So this doesn't come as too much surprise for me. Here's the thing. Nintendo 3DS has sold so many, just millions of units, right? I think it's around 70-something million units worldwide. So they continue to sell. I mean, it's not selling as fast as it did because Nintendo's not currently supporting it with first-party games. Well, if you have picture yourself as a company, right? So you have something that's really hot right now. So that would be
My company would focus on Little Big Planet merch.
Well, I mean, that's really hot right now, so that's smart.
Correct.
Anyway, you can derail me. So say your company has a really hot product, right? So in this
A
case,
Little Big Planet action figure.
in this
perhaps.
case, it's Nintendo with the Nintendo Switch, right? It's selling, very, very, very well. It's very popular. All their focus is on it right now. Well, they think about having a product as well as that company that was really hot and still continues to sell. Not as well, but it's a ship that's sinking, but you're still making money off of it, right? So why would you stop selling it? If you're making money, why would you stop selling it? And it's not like it's competing with the Switch. It's $130 compared to the Switch Lite's going to be like $200 when it comes out, right? Yeah, it's an $80 difference, but
Well, yeah, and couple that with, a full price game on the 3DS is 40, whereas a full price game on the Switch is 60. That's
60, yeah.
That's a fair difference. That you buy 2 3DS games, that's another $40 that you would have spent on Switch games that you can buy another full price game with. Plenty of games don't even hit that $40 price tag, but
Right. And okay, so take just a family, right? So you got little Timmy, little Jimmy, right? They asked for Christmas. They want a Nintendo console. Well,
which I personally think is stupid. I would have asked for a PS Vita to play Little Big World.
all right. So little Timmy and little Jimmy asked mom for a Nintendo console, and to their disappointment, they get each a 2DS XL, new 2DS XL. Well, mom spent $240 rather than $200. That's a really big difference, right? So it's at a price point in which it's not going to necessarily compete with the Switch, but also it's not as hot as the Switch, so it's going to fly a little bit more under the radar, right? So it makes sense for Nintendo to continue riding out the ship as long as they can, and we'll just kind of see how long they quote-unquote support the 3DS. Obviously, their first-party games are done. I think the biggest last release was Persona Q2, but
that wasn't even first party. The last first
No,
party
it wasn't
release was
first party.
Kirby's Epic Extra Yarn,
oh yeah, that's
a
right.
port of a Wii game.
Well, I was just saying like the last big
yeah.
game, and I say that with air quotes because it's just Persona.
Yeah.
But moving on to our next topic, so there are problems with the Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons. I'm sure you know this. It's happened with me. It's happened with Pat. It's happened with seems like everybody. I know it's not everybody, but it's honestly the issues are so common that it seems as if it is. So people have been reporting for the longest time that their Joy-Cons, the controllers that come with their Switch, are drifting. So essentially the stick component wears out over time, and then the pad starts to read that the stick is pointing in a different direction. So say you're playing Zelda and you're holding forward next to a cliff. Well, then you stop because you don't want to hop off the cliff, right? Well, you hop off the cliff because the Joy-Con continues to think that you're holding the stick down when you're not. Well, this has become such a widespread problem. And keep in mind, the Switch has been out for over 2 years now. It's become such a widespread problem that there's some law firms, according to GoNintendo.com, there's some law firms that are actually looking at a potential class action lawsuit against the company. And I'm not big on suing Nintendo. I love Nintendo, but they've really given this issue the blind eye. And maybe it's just all the hardcore users, people who are constantly using their Switch that have problems with their Joy-Cons. I had one of the very first generation Switches. I got it like a week after it came out, right? And I had drift problems almost 4 months after owning it, and that's just playing Zelda. I played it a good bit, but like not as much as someone who's super, super dedicated, right? And that's pretty unacceptable. I don't know if the issue's consistent for everyone else, but that's pretty unacceptable. And so to let that go out of quality control is pretty disappointing. So I hope this class action lawsuit comes to something. It just even if I can just send in my Joy-Cons for a free repair. Like I'd even be happy with that. But have you had any experience with drifting on yours?
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure I got a second production wave Switch. So I didn't have it nearly as quickly as you, but I did get drifting after about a year. I would say it was probably 400, 500 hours of play, which is a fair amount, but for controllers that cost $80, I wouldn't expect it. And I noticed it when I was playing Super Mario Odyssey. I thought Mario had finally gained sentience and was on the hunt for some coochie. Turns out it was Joy-Con drifting, but it was a very annoying issue. I had to get a new pair of Joy-Cons. And I basically got into a mindset where, once I hit this threshold, I have to prepare myself to buy new Joy-Cons. And it's not like they're super cheap. They're not.
It's $80.
It's $80.
It's almost a third of the Switch price tag.
Yeah, exactly. And, you expect normal wear and tear, but this isn't normal wear and tear. This is a manufacturing issue or a design issue that is causing people to become upset with their Switch, which should be the last thing Nintendo wants. And this is especially odd for Nintendo because, they pride themselves on their hardware durability. They showcase that Game Boy that was in the Gulf War and still functions. That's a huge thing. That you see that online, you see that in the store, you see that everywhere. The Wii was famously durable. I personally I've done things that Nintendo did not expect with the Wii remote, and it's functioning just fine to this day. So I don't know why Nintendo would allow this to slip. They've prided themselves on hardware durability in the past. I don't know if they were just rushing to get something out because they were trying to cover their asses after the Wii U, but I don't know what exactly was going through their head. But they've let it slide. They've continued to turn a blind eye, and it's getting to the point where people are starting to get upset. I've noticed a lot of discussion over the past few weeks on social media. People really starting to get upset because I think we're getting to a point now where even some of the more casual players are experiencing it.
Yeah, especially after 2 years.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people who maybe got it that summer after release, or that first summer of release, summer 2017, who play it casually, who are maybe just now hitting that threshold, they're starting to notice it. So you're getting more and more people upset. And as the Switch continues to move big numbers, it's going to become a bigger issue.
Yeah, and speaking of the Switch moving bigger numbers, that's where the Switch Lite comes in, right? So the Nintendo Switch Lite, its sole purpose, outside of just being a dedicated handheld, is to get Switches in the hands of more kids, especially with Pokemon coming out. Pokemon just sells enormous amounts. So now you have little Timmy and little Jimmy playing with their brand new Nintendo Switch Lite, which has the same joystick components, supposedly, this is what we know right now, has the same joystick components as the current Joy-Cons do, right? And Nintendo hasn't commented on the issue, right? And kids roughhouse their consoles. Like, if you give a kid a DS, a Game Boy, they're going to rough it up. Well, the Nintendo Switch Lite is solely focused on kids. And so
just to point out, the Nintendo 2DS, the original one, was marketed towards kids the same way this Nintendo Switch Lite seems to be. And the biggest design difference between the 2DS and the 3DS was the hinge. They got rid of that, obviously, with the XL. But when you look at the 2DS, it's one big flat thing because the hinge was easily the most breakable component of the 3DS, and kids kept breaking it.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how many moms had to take 2 3DS pieces into GameStop and say, little Timmy got upset, Little Big Planet isn't on the DS, and he snapped it in half. So they focused on durability in the past for these cheaper models. I don't know why they wouldn't do it again.
Yeah, exactly. And they even, like in the Switch Lite announcement trailer, they even tried to make a point. They didn't necessarily say durability, but they nodded towards it with it being lighter, with it being more portable. They emphasized how it can just fit in your pocket and be more portable, right? Well, okay, if the joysticks have the same components, well, they're going to start breaking over time. And if kids are roughhousing it, then they're really going to start breaking soon, even if they're just casually playing. The kid could be irresponsible. You never know. So I really hope that Nintendo addresses this issue. And also, we saw some new Joy-Con colors announced. So maybe if they addressed it in the new Nintendo Switch Lite, maybe they addressed the components in the new Joy-Cons as well. But no, maybe we'll potentially see this class action lawsuit go through, and maybe we'll all get new components in our own Joy-Cons, because I definitely want some in mine. But moving from that, let's discuss the Switch Lite. It's a fairly interesting one. When I saw it, I wasn't surprised. I'm assuming you probably weren't surprised either.
No, I actually had known about it for a few weeks because when they finally finished filming the trailer and had decided to push it out, I woke up in the middle of the night to my 3DS screaming in existential agony. Like, it knew something dark was coming, and that woke me up. And I had to soothe it and say, don't worry, Doug Bowser won't get rid of you yet. Don't worry. So I figured something like this was on the horizon.
And while comforting, I want to emphasize the word yet. So yeah, the new Nintendo Switch Lite is boasting a 5.5-inch screen, and it comes in 3 different colors. So we got yellow, blue, and more of a turquoise color, actually, and gray. It doesn't have HD rumble. I believe it does have gyro, but it doesn't have detachable Joy-Cons, and it can't dock either, which is really, really fascinating. I think this is actually a very smart move on Nintendo's part to release a handheld like this, and especially at the price tag of $200. As we mentioned earlier, that's kind of a make it or break it for a lot of families and a lot of parents. And it shows a more kid focused approach. Despite all the young adults they had in the ads, just like they've done for all the Switch ads, it really is. It's going to be a Pokemon machine. It really is going to be a Pokemon machine. At least for kids. They're going to have your Mario, you're going to have your Zelda, but Pokemon sells a lot, and the more Switches they have in the hands of kids, the more Pokemon they're going to sell. And I think it's really, really smart of them to release a more budget model, something with a more kid focus and more durability. It just makes a lot of sense, a lot of business sense.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see once we get some hardware teardowns of this from YouTube channels like iFixit or Jerry Rig Everything, whether or not this inability to dock is software produced or a hardware limitation. Because I think if it's software produced, that could lead to some interesting results. It could lead to people being upset with Nintendo, or it could lead to some aftermarket docks or some third-party docks that kind of ultimately allow you to dock the Switch Lite just like you would a regular Switch, which could end up pushing Switch Lite sales even further, I think, which could be really interesting to see. But it very well could be a hardware limitation. Obviously, HDMI royalties are pretty expensive, so that's probably a big cost-saving measure. So I doubt it's a software limitation, but it will be interesting to see because I've read some things that have said, just on social media and whatnot, that have suggested that this could potentially be a software limitation.
No, that's entirely possible. And even looking at the dimensions of the product here, especially looking at the depth dimension, it has the same depth as the current Switch. So, they have plenty of room to put the right fans, to put the right, cooling solutions, metal heat pipes, all that. So it possibly, could dock if they really, really wanted it to. But there always is, it is a smaller product, so maybe they had to make room for the battery, maybe just the heat limitations, the way it is internally designed. I'm not an engineer, I don't know, but maybe the way it is internally designed just isn't optimal for that play. But, hackers have hacked the original Switch pretty well. They've overclocked it, they've done all kinds of things with it, and they can make it in handheld mode run as it does in docked mode. So I'm sure once the hacking scene kicks up for the Nintendo Switch Lite, we'll eventually see people doing similar, clocking it at similar speeds to the current Nintendo Switch. But we'll kind of see. One of the biggest things I think is the new battery life on it. So it is a 3 to 7 hour battery life, which is awesome for how small the product is. And again, it is a smaller product, so it's going to have a smaller battery, but it has a larger capacity, not larger capacity, a larger battery life than the current Nintendo Switch model in handheld mode. And the reason why this is because of the new Tegra X1 chip that's rumored to be in it. So NVIDIA is releasing a new NVIDIA Shield TV coming out sometime later this year, and it's rumored to have a new Tegra X1 revision that's on a 16 nanometer process aside from a 20 nanometer process. And for those of you who don't really understand the differences between those processes, a 4 nanometer process difference is exponential in how efficient a chip performs. So the same chip but done on a smaller nanometer process is going to make it much more efficient, even a bit more powerful. I don't think Nintendo's really going to utilize that to keep parity between all the devices, but they're definitely taking advantage of the battery saving aspect of the new 16 nanometer process. So
definitely taking use of that to make the Switch Lite have a better battery life, and we've seen the new model of the Switch that's coming out. Obviously, normal Switch and everything except the battery life. It might use that same processor that they're putting in the Switch Lite, that rumored new NVIDIA chip. So if it does run with a better battery life, better efficiency, which obviously it does based on the Switch Lite's battery life,
it's
we can see a lot more.
4.5 to 9 hours.
Yeah, a lot more on the regular base Switch model.
Yeah, it'll be very, very interesting. Again, back to the whole hacking thing I was talking about is once they figure out how to crack the new Nintendo Switch, they probably can see overclocking performances better than what they have on the current Switch, unless there is just a hardware limitation or something Nintendo puts in there to keep them from boosting over the same clocks that the current X1 has. But I don't know if that's actually a thing. So yeah, the Nintendo Switch Lite is looking very, very promising. I think it's gonna sell a lot. Another thing I wanted to mention is the special edition, the Pokemon Special Edition. So think about it. We haven't had very many special edition Switch products. I mean, we've had the Let's Go ones with the custom Joy Cons. We had the Smash one. I'm trying to think what else. I know there's a Dragon Age or a Dragon Quest one coming out, but that's for the new Nintendo Switch model. But as far as the current one that we have, there haven't been too many special editions. But
There have been some bundles. There was a Super Mario Odyssey bundle, I believe, that came with a pair of Joy-Cons that weren't yet available, but now you can buy those neon red Joy-Cons by themselves. So that was a bundle at one point that was exclusive to the bundle, but even that they just decided to go ahead and sell the Joy-Cons.
Right, and so it's cool seeing an actual special edition product. So if y'all haven't seen it, it's a white Nintendo Switch Lite with the new Pokemon Legendaries etched in the background on the back of the product, and the left and right joysticks are blue and red respectively. I could have that backwards, but it's actually custom rather than just having differing Joy-Cons or a differing dock. And it's cool to see this because Nintendo's always been big on special editions with their products.
Especially with their handhelds.
Especially with their handhelds. And again, I think this emphasizes my point of how this is more kid-focused. And, seeing Pikachu, seeing Minecraft, seeing whatever on a 3DS is going to draw kids into buying it more. And, and parents seeing their kids wanting the product more. So, I think we are going to see down the road more and more special edition Nintendo Switch Lites. And I'm excited to see what they do. I'm not going to shell out $200 to get a special edition one, but no, I'm interested to see what they come up with.
Okay, so to wrap things up, we're both going to kind of cover some things that we have been looking at recently, what has caught our eye. We're calling it We're Pressing Y for, because we're very clever, we're very original. We've come up with this amazing idea where we talk about things that we like at the end of our podcast. That's very fun.
Original.
Very original. Pretty quirky. So anyway,
we're not like other girls.
We're not like most podcasts. We're not. But what I am pressing Y for currently is the new handheld that's being worked on by a small team called Panic. For about 2 decades now, they've been working on mostly iOS and Mac software, I believe. But now they're reaching their hand into the hardware world. They're creating a handheld console called the Playdate. And it's a very interesting looking device. Imagine a squished Game Boy, an original Game Boy kind of squished down, so it's a little shorter, and it's bright yellow. But on the right side, it has just this weird-ass crank. Like, I don't know how to describe it except what you would use to roll down a window on an old car. It's very interesting, very cool. They're getting a lot of smaller, I don't want to say indie, but kind of smaller studio developers to create custom games for it. I believe the way they're doing it is they're doing, 12 games that are released weekly. They're calling it, Season 1 or something. I'm not sure, but I know the big one that I've seen is the director, I believe, of Katamari Damacy, which is obviously kind of a cult classic. Recently got a re-release, is creating a game for it. And some of them just use the buttons, some of them just use the D-pad, some of them use the crank, but there's not much information on it right now because I think the development cycle is kind of just getting started for it. But it looks really interesting and it's definitely something I'm keeping my eye on. Something, I'm pressing Y for.
Yeah, that's really interesting. See, I think I've seen this in I have it pulled up on my phone right now. I think I've seen this in one tweet, but I just scrolled over it thinking it was some concept or something. That's really, really interesting. I would have never thought to put a crank on something that's essentially just a 21st century Game Boy. It is very interesting. I'm curious to see where that goes, and that's cool that you brought that up.
But sorry to cut you off, but it kind of, one of the reasons I really like it is obviously it's just original, but also it kind of shows this convergence we're seeing over the past few years of indie studios and AAA studios. Kind of that disparity between them is growing smaller by the year, it seems. For example, we have Cuphead, which is considered an indie, but heavily funded by Microsoft.
Yeah, very much.
We have these big crossovers between The Legend of Zelda, a very iconic franchise like we mentioned earlier in the episode, with I don't want to say a no-name indie title, but an indie title that wasn't well-known. It certainly wasn't recognized by a lot of people. And we're kind of seeing this merging of indie and AAA, not to a super big extent, but in such a way that we're kind of getting the creativity and the passion of these indie projects with production value and the IPs of huge AAA studios. So it's really interesting, and I think this kind of embodies that in the sense that you have relatively big names in the gaming industry coming together on this very strange, very indie focused handheld console, and I think that's really cool and really opens the door to new possibilities.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, what I'm pressing Y for is a game I've had since I was a child and something I've enjoyed just throughout my life. And there's been so many different generations of the game throughout my life.
Gunnar, is it Little Big Planet?
Unfortunately, not.
Okay.
The game I'm talking about is Super Smash Brothers. See, I've had Super Smash Brothers ever since Melee. I didn't play Melee all that much. In fact, I only had it for probably like 6 months or something before I stupidly sold it to GameStop, just like I did with most of my games when I was a little kid. I should have kept them. But I always played Brawl at my friend's house. I'd always get my butt kicked, but occasionally I'd go over to the friend's house who they were bad, so I'd be able to kick their butt or whatever. But as an adult, I started playing a lot of Smash Brothers 4, which it's Smash Brothers 4. It's a fun party game, but not the best out of all the Smash games, I think. But when I started playing it, I started noticing the minutia to the mechanics of the game. And so Smash Brothers became, instead of just a casual just hang out with my friends and play it game, it became a hang out with my friends but try to destroy them game, because I discovered all these mechanics and all these competitive things that you can do, and it turned the game on a whole new level for me. But what I love so much about Smash Brothers, and what I really love about Ultimate, because I think Ultimate has done it best so far, is how a game like Smash Brothers can be both a party game and a very casual game, as well as something that has so much depth and so much time that you can put into all the mechanics and knowing all the techniques and all the various combat elements. And it's just something that I really, really enjoy playing. Something I really enjoy playing with my friends. Like me and Pat will play it, but we won't go, or I won't go super, super hard on him just because, I love playing the game competitively and I want to make it fun for my friends. But like, there's so many different levels and ways to play. And so that's just why I love Super Smash Bros.
Yeah, some fans have been saying that Super Smash Bros. Is to Gunnar what Little Big Planet is to me. So I can really understand his love and devotion to this series.
And see, we click on this level, and that's why we're doing this podcast. So thank you so much all for joining us on this very first episode of the Press Y podcast. This is really, really fun to get set up and do. Literally decided earlier this week, wanted to do a podcast, and here we are. We're doing a podcast. So again, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to listen in next week, and we hope to have some great content for you. So thank you so much.